I was doing a live stream last night and I was explaining how I read tarot cards to my online friends, my online audience. And I was really insisting that I like to do positivistic tarot readings, that I have a positive meaning for every card in the deck. And I was rabbiting on about being positivistic. And one of my online friends, subscribers, said, "Oh, Robert, you save all your negativity for your book reviews." And I suppose it's true. I suppose I am one of the few YouTubers who has expressed a negative opinion, for example, of Rachel Pollack's 78 Degrees of Wisdom. I was thinking to myself the other day, is it nice to attack other people, other writers and so forth? Then I thought, well, criticism is not really attack. I see myself as, in a sense, defending what I see as tarot. And I would like tarot to be, to work for people, to be relatively accessible, to be something that everyone can do, and to be something that everyone can use to live a better life and to make a better world, quite frankly. And that's where I'm coming from. So if I am negative about a book or a tarot deck, please see it within that framework. Which brings us on to this book, Alejando Jodorowsky and Marianne Costa, although she's not terribly visible or audible in this book. It's called The Way of Tarot, The Spiritual Teacher in the Cards. Now, to many people watching, this book will need no introduction. It's extremely famous. It's extremely influential. So it's a bit of a 78 Degrees of Wisdom here. And I had to have a strong cup of tea before attempting to make this video. It actually is quite similar to 78 Degrees of Wisdom in some ways. The similarity is that Rachel Pollack takes the Rider-Waite-Smith and treats it as a holy book, as gospel truth, as something with infinite wisdom where you can just look further and further and further into the structure of the deck and the structure of the cards. And the more you look, the more fabulous esoteric secrets it will render up. And I think that's, not a bad idea. I just think it goes too far. She's too reverent. And similarly, I think this is the sort of, this is the Marseille version of 78 Degrees of Wisdom, even though it was published much, much later. It looks at the Tarot de Marseille. In fact, it looks at a particular Tarot de Marseille, which Jodorowsky partly created himself, and says, look into here, you will find all the secrets of the universe. And you can actually put the two books side by side and notice the similarities and differences. One comparison you can do is this, that Rachel Pollack says that you can take the major arcana and lay them out in 3 rows of 7, and then you can read down the columns and you can find that, card number 1, card number 8, and card number 15 have something in common. And then card number 2, card number 9, card number 16, and so on and so forth. And she goes into great detail, proving why this is all very deliberate and very clever and very much secret knowledge. And then Jodorowsky does exactly the same thing with the Tarot de Marseille, using the major arcana, and says you lay them out in 2 rows of 10. So card number 1 has strange secret connections with card number 11, and so on and so forth. And you think to yourself, well, can they both be right? On the plus side, this writer is very intelligent, very maverick, very unconventional. He's very creative. He's very cultured. You probably know that he's also a film director and I suppose a kind of psychotherapist of sorts. It's consistently well written from beginning to end. And so although it gets kind of hard to read once you get onto the minor arcana, once he's looking at these Tarot de Marseille pip cards and reading the whole universe into the shape of one leaf, it is consistently well written. And even though I find it quite difficult to grind my way through because I wasn't really getting anything out of it, it is worth it because when you get to the end is very good. Do I recommend this book? No, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. But I do recommend the last 10 pages. I think that if you're lucky enough to be in a bookshop and you see it on the shelf, I would say find yourself a chair, settle down and read really the last 10 or 12 pages of the book. And you get a great essay by Jodorowsky about reading tarot cards, which contains a lot of wisdom. And it contains a lot that I agree with. For example, the need to be relentlessly positivistic and to absolutely exclude negative tending interpretations of the cards. I agree with him wholeheartedly on that. So I think that probably if I met him or if I had a reading with him, I would probably be, best friends. I've seen him on Instagram. I think he's very charming. And this is clearly an important and rather brilliant figure. But the book, ladies and gentlemen, the book is a real problem. It's puzzling because it seems so nonsensical. And I was like halfway through it and I put a shout out on YouTube asking any viewers to come in with any tips and help me to read this book and make sense of it, make head or tail of it, in fact. And I mean, clearly when you put a shout out, you don't get mainly fans. I got quite a lot of people being quite critical of this book. There is a feeling that the book might be a little bit of a prank. It might be a little bit of an imposture. There were people saying that the real function of the book was to sell the deck. Now, bit of background. Jodorowsky teamed up with a guy who had inherited the rights to print the Tarot de Marseille. I'll put his name in afterwards. And so Jodorowsky and this Marseille, Tarot de Marseille heir, they sat down and they restored the Tarot de Marseille in a way that they felt was right. They tweaked it, didn't they? They added little details. It seems that they brushed up the colours. Oh, and by the way, here's my flatmate, the famous tarot reader and designer, Jacopo Bosio. And he has
everyone.
And he has something to say about this review.
Yeah, please, Robert, don't be too bitchy.
Right.
Please.
Okay.
Be kind with Jodorowsky.
I'm going to do my best.
Bye.
Thanks, Jacopo. Okay, where were we?
Yeah, wow.
Be kind to Jodorowsky. Okay, so the central question at the heart of this book is this. If Jodorowsky is partly responsible for creating this deck, then how much sense does it make that he claims to see so many esoteric secrets hidden in the deck? Or putting it another way, did he personally put the esoteric flourishes into the deck himself? And if so, why should we take it seriously? I think in a sense, the whole project is quite similar to A.E. Waite creating the Rider-Waite-Smith deck with Pamela's collaboration. And indeed, many of these esoteric decks that we know and love, that there is often a claim by the designer that they were restoring the tarot, that they were, A.E. Waite said he was rectifying the tarot. He was bringing it back to how it should have been in its pure form. And so both A.E. Waite and Jodorowsky think that there is a pure, original, unblemished tarot somewhere, and that all the other tarots around the world are just mistakes. He's incredibly rude about the RWS, and I have heard, incidentally, that he started off as an RWS reader and read the RWS for many years and collected RWS derivative decks, and then had this sort of conversion to Tarot de Marseille and decided the RWS was trash. But I think in a sense he's very like A.E. Waite, create a deck and then claim that it has the secrets of the universe in it. The other big problem with this book, which I think any 21st reader would come across, anyone who's read a little bit about tarot, and the book came out in the 21st century, the book came out quite late, considering what it says, is that he's claiming to know what the original tarot is or should be. And yet his comments about tarot history are very puzzling, and puzzling being a euphemism for inaccurate. He says, oh yeah, tarot was created around the year 1000, ladies and gentlemen. Well, answers on a postcard, as everyone knows now, that's not true. So he's out by 400 years. He also suggests, rather than claims that the tarot was created in France. It's important for him to say that because he's making such claims for the Tarot de Marseille. And yet, ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, it wasn't. He blames the English for creating the deck of playing cards, which he says, came after the tarot, which again is not true. He says the English got the tarot and threw out 26 cards, and then it became this awful thing, the playing card deck. And then he says, oh, and by the way, 26, that's the number of God. So they threw God out of the tarot, and they created this godless deck, which is all complete nonsense because that's not how it happened. As we all know, the playing cards came first, and then some bright spark added the major arcana. And I don't want to bang on, but I think 21st century research has established that in the first century or so of tarot, certainly the first 50 years, the first wave of tarot decks came out in Italy. It was a kind of craze, and they were all kind of different, The minor arcana was, it was there it was. But the major arcana wasn't always 22 cards. It was 14 cards or 20 or whatever it was. And various major arcana figures sort of came and went. There wasn't always a death card. There wasn't always a tower card. There might have been a temperance card, and then that disappeared. So to say, oh yes, it was always 22 is a bit nonsensical. Now, it is perfectly conceivable that some bright spark in the second or third wave of tarot, maybe in the 17th century or maybe before, some bright spark who knew about Kabbalah. Oh, and by the way, tarot was invented at a time when Kabbalah was not really a currency in Europe. But it is possible that later, maybe in the 17th century or maybe a bit earlier, some bright spark with a knowledge of Kabbalah sat down and made the tarot esoteric. And that could have happened before the 18th century. That's all quite possible. So I'm not saying that the Tarot de Marseille is not an esoteric deck. It's just that the way this book is written is very obsessive and very rhapsodic and just a bit much. Everything means everything. The colours all have significances. And when you get to the minor arcana, it's just brain frying, if I may use that word. There's a leaf here pointing to the left. There's a leaf here pointing to the right. He looks at the cups in one of the cards and he says, oh, the cross hatching, the way it's shaded in this card is sort of diagonal going downwards if you read from left to right, and the cross hatching on that cup is sort of, which is diagonal, is sort of going upwards if you read from left to right, as we do in the West. And so this cup is sort of relating to an earth energy, and that cup is relating to a heaven energy. And it's just rather tiring to read. And you can even catch him out in some of these extraordinarily pernickety little esoteric details. Like there's one point where he says, if you look at the Ace of Coins, it's got 12 little bits sort of going around the radius. And if you add 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way up to 12, you get to 78. And you think, wow, that's mind-blowing. And what does it mean? And then you take a closer look at the Ace of Coins and you count the little triangles going around it. And actually there aren't 12, there are 16. And you count it again and there are 16. So it's kind of maddening. So the book came out in 2004. I think it is a bit old-fashioned in terms of its research, but also in terms of its attitude. He tries very hard not to be sexist. Doesn't entirely succeed. He refers to the female genitalia in one case as an oven, and in another case, I think, as a hot cave. He doesn't refer to male genitalia as ovens or caves or pumps or pistons. But he does refer to sex as an insemination, and he talks of these inseminations. Let me read you what he says about the notorious Queen of Battens. And he likes to make the tarot cards talk, which is quite fun, but maybe not always terribly helpful. He says, I have dived into the incessant river of desire with the gluttony of a tornado. I offer my burning cavern to every insemination. And of course, that's splendid stuff. And if one enjoys, purple writing, one can get a hit out of that. But I think if I were a lady, I might find that a bit creepy. The Kings are quite good. So I've promised my flatmate I'm not going to be bitchy to Jodorowsky. I'm finding it difficult. It's old-fashioned, again, like Rachel Pollack, in the sense that I think it's a book that makes life more difficult than it was before you read it. There's this feeling that you have to, you get to heaven through this extremely complicated, esoteric way. And that might be true for some people, but it's not true for me. He does sort of refer to human beings as sort of miserable sinners throughout the book. He talks about one's desires and one's thoughts as these terrible, terrible things. If the world card could speak to us, the world card would say, the world card would deliver like a sermon to us, and it would go like this. Like four rivers returning to their single source, leave behind the blind swarm of bees that are your concepts to melt within my bliss. Leave behind the herd of your feelings to drown within my infinite exaltation. Offer me the demented mob of your desires. Well, I don't see my desires as a demented mob. I'm a sort of a tantrist in that respect. I see my desires as the things that in their way are going to help me to get to heaven. They're not going to be the things that I need to call a demented mob and leave behind. Now, I'm not being bitchy to Jodorowsky. I'm just saying that I have a philosophical difference here. And so I don't buy into the philosophy behind the book. Not really. Do I recommend it? No, not really. I'm not particularly well read in terms of Tarot de Marseille reading. And in fact, this is the first in-depth Tarot de Marseille book that I've read. I was hoping that it would charm me. In fact, I had been thinking that, that the Rider-Waite-Smith Major Arcana is a bit tiresome in parts. I don't particularly like it. And I've been looking for RWS Marseille hybrid decks because I like the RWS Minor Arcana, and I find the Tarot de Marseille Major Arcana charming and helpful and inspiring. And so I kind of want both those things. But I found that these hybrid decks that are flying around these days are not really terribly helpful. So I thought, okay, let me at least read up about Tarot de Marseille. I mean, I have friends who use it, and that's how they read, and it works for them. So it must work. And frankly, this book has satisfied my curiosity for quite some time. I don't think I will be diving back into Tarot de Marseille for quite some time. In other words, it has put me off Tarot de Marseille for the time being. I think the first half of the book is quite amusing when he talks about the Major Arcana and when he makes them speak. It's very excessive, it's very poetic. Of course, one should never assume anything about anyone, but it sounds as if there is a little bit of maybe drug taking behind it. Worlds are always exploding. Every Major Arcana card is a fantastic deity who contains the whole of existence, which is fine. I mean, the universe is a holographic universe. We do all contain the whole universe within us, but for him, it's especially the tarot cards contain the whole universe within them. The Fool, for example, is an illuminatus, a god, a giant, drawing an immeasurable liberating strength from the energy flow. And they all are. And so there's not really enough light and shade. And, the book is called The Spiritual Teacher in the Cards, but I just couldn't grasp anything that was really being taught. And as I said, the Minor Arcana is so weird. And it makes such fantastical claims about a sword pointing in that direction, a baton pointing in that direction, that you would have to be, I think, quite tough to go along with it. Before I finish, I just wanted to say in passing that Jacopo has begged me not to be bitchy about Jodorowsky. And, I usually try to do what Jacopo says, but Jodorowsky is bitchy about other people. He gives a long sort of sermon at one stage in the book about the importance of trying to be as saintly as possible as a tarot reader. And of course, he says you can't be a saint, none of us can be saints, but you can imitate saintliness. And then he, for like 5 or 10 pages, he goes on and it's like Sermon on the Mount. He tells you how he recommends you behave. don't sleep too much, eat the right food, don't be bitchy, be nice to people, be respectful, read a book every now and then. And it's just like all these recommendations for saintly behavior. Then the sermon ends, and the next thing he says is that he launches into this character assassination of an old school tarot reader in Paris that he went to see. And I think part of the reason why this book was so popular, certainly in Italy, where Jacopo comes from, is that it suggested a more kind of thoughtful, more psychological approach to tarot. It wanted to sweep away this idea that tarot is fortune telling and it's something that people do on TV and make cash out of it. So there was a certain feeling that tarot had been cheapened by a certain genre, by a certain cadre of tarot readers. So having given his sermon on saintliness, he then talks about visiting this lady in Paris, who he names Madame Robin, a famous clairvoyant who had earned her notoriety thanks to the publication of a pocket tarot, with extremely simple explanations at the foot of each card. Explanations that obviously limited the projective power of the cards by reducing them to this and nothing else is what this arcanum means. When I entered her apartment expecting to find a temple, I found myself in a charming bathroom. The clairvoyant, who was about 50, tiny, plump, and wearing a pink bathrobe, was sitting in a cosy armchair. Two men, who looked like they were of working-class origin, were kneeling at her feet, gazing at her devotedly while cutting her nails. At the same time, she was clipping the claws of her cat. A table offered several plates of cheeses, salads, pastries, fruits, and wines of good quality. Her customers waited patiently in another room until the Sibyl had dined. This is what she now did in the company of the three of us, gluttonously devouring an incredible quantity of food. Film gossip interested her much more than my ideas on the tarot. She granted me the honour of sitting in on her consultation. It goes on. Madame Robin knew only the names and numbers of her cards. Their details had never held her attention. She used the tarot like an element intended to impress her clientele, striking them down with the air of a magician and spreading them out with no reading strategy, letting fall from her lips whatever popped into her head. So I think that's really bitchy, and I think one should live and let live. I think in really 21st century terms, one might say that Jodorowsky's not very queer. Personally, I think that Madame Robin sounds rather good, sitting there stuffing her face and clipping her cat's toenails with a long line of clients and just saying anything that pops into her head, because I think that the spirit guides are not fussy and they will speak through people like Madame Robin if they wish to. I've recently been reading a biography of Marianne Lenormand in the Napoleonic times, who sounds actually very like Madame Robin, even though Marianne Lenormand was not tiny. She was big, but she was a great glutton. She ate as much as she could possibly eat, and she did have the air of a magician. But she read tarot for Napoleon and Empress Josephine, and she was wildly successful. She was a superstar, and she made accurate prophecies all through her life. So, I don't think that's very nice. But as I wanted to say, though I don't recommend this book, I do recommend the last 10 pages. In it, he kind of pulls himself together and he just gives us his thoughts on tarot reading, and they're really good. And I agree with every word. He's basically a highly careful and positivistic reader. And I think if those 10 pages had been published as a little leaflet, that would have been fine. I shall say no more. Thanks for your attention. I'm Robert Farrer. This is Tea and Tara. I'll be back next week with more of this stuff. Bye.